Now, what we do here at Skinz to put these on, some companies will tell you to use a drill or to light the inside of the drum or what have you. It's unnecessary. Even though our instructions do say to do that, you don't really have to do that if you have the proper tools. What we use is we use a hole punch, which is you could get them at any hardware store. They're extremely sharp at the end, so we say, try not to keep them around your eyes or anything. You might hurt yourself. But anyways, going from the inside of the drum, now that we've centered up our wrap and got it all ready to go, we want to start with just one lug. The reason why we do that is that it anchors the wrap where we want it to be before we start doing all the rest of the holes. You want to make sure that you get the placement proper. So, since we do know exactly where we want our wrap, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and put my seam closer to the lug holes so that we don't have any issues. And generally, if you want to reposition, it's usually pretty easy since there's nothing actually holding it on other than that it's relatively tight. You can just hold the drum with, the drum shell with both hands like this, using your thumbs. You can rotate that wrap. As you can see, it turns fairly easy. And you can rotate it in position however you want. So, like I stated earlier, what I want to do is I want to get my lug holes right here, right underneath that seam. So, the lugs will actually sit directly on top of that seam, and then I won't have such an ugly connection there. So, there we go. We're all done. I check my snare beds again to make sure that they're, that I've got a little bit of space there between the finish and the edge of the snare bed. And now I'm going to go ahead and apply one of my lugs. So, using my hole punch, from the inside of the drum, I start with whichever I want, and I just barely, again, be careful doing this. You don't want to prick your finger. But you can also use a Phillips head screwdriver. Forgot to mention that earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a Phillips head screwdriver, which is probably what you're going to be using out there, to show you just how easy this is. So using a Phillips head screwdriver, I'm going to put my finger, one of my fingers on my left hand, on top of one of the lug holes where the screws go through. Okay. Then from the inside, placing the screwdriver inside of the hole, apply just a little bit of pressure and rotate a little bit. Not enough to poke through the finish, because what I don't want to do is poke through it yet. What I'm doing here is I'm applying just enough pressure to allow for a small dimple to appear on the outside of the wrap. That gives me proper positioning so that I can then go from the outside, take the screwdriver, and pop it right through that hole. So these wraps are 10 millimeter, but they're thin enough that you can do that. You can actually take a screwdriver and run it right through there. And the reason why I dimpled it from the inside first is so I had proper placement, because you don't just want to blindly start stabbing into your wrap because you'll destroy the finish. But anyways, that being said, now what I've got to do is I've got to do the bottom one. So again, laying the drum flat, putting my finger on the outside of the lug hole, rotate the screwdriver through that hole, allowing for my dimple, taking my screwdriver, placing it on top of that dimple, and push it through. Again, done. So now, I've got my two holes to place my first lug. So I take one of my lugs, making sure that my tension rod brass insert is facing up, and stick it inside of my holes, like so, and apply a little bit of pressure to make sure that they seat inside of the holes. So it should fit pretty much like that. No screws are put in yet, but it goes ahead and it holds it. And then we take our screws, and from the inside, of course, put them on. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind, most drum manufacturers do not use excessive pressure on these little screws. Reason why is that they can twist off and they can damage the lug itself, which you don't want to have to replace them if you don't have to. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use this small handheld drill with a 7 millimeter socket on it, and this will allow me to tighten those screws. Again, not too tight. You want to back off your torque on your drill so that you're not putting them in too tight. And we're going to make them snug. And there's your first lug. So now that that's done, now that holds the wrap in place so it can't rotate, it can't slide from side to side. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go where I have this lug put on, I'm going to go perpendicular to it and put in this lug. So again, using my screwdriver from the inside, putting a small dimple, and I'm just going to speed this up a little bit by going ahead and doing both dimples because I can do that now, seeing as that the wrap is now set. So now that I've got my two dimples from the outside, go ahead and pop my screwdriver through both holes and seat my lug. Done. Now go ahead and put my screws in. And screw them on. Okay, now it's time to do the rest of the lugs. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish doing all the rest of the lugs on this drum, and then I'm going to show you how to put the name badge and the air hole in. Okay, now that we've got all of our lugs back on and our strainers, we're ready to put in the air hole. Now, the air hole has to be done a little bit different than the way you put on the lugs and the strainers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an X-Acto knife. Going from the inside of the shell, we're going to find our air hole, and taking the X-Acto knife, laying it inside the shell. Let me show you. So we're going to lay it inside of the shell, inside of the hole, pushing through the wrap, and then go around the perimeter of the hole to make sure that we cut a nice, clean hole. You don't want it to be ragged, you don't want it to be, you don't want it to tear the wrap. So basically what you're going to have then at that point is a nice, clean hole. So taking the, in this case, like I stated earlier, we had a replaceable or a removable air hole vent. We're going to go ahead and put that in. So, doing the inside grommet first, put it in, put in the rubber bushing on the outside of the grommet, pushing it through the outside of the shell and into the sleeve on the inside of the shell, and push it in. Done. So now the air hole vent is in place. Okay, now that we have the air hole vent in place, and seated firmly so it doesn't rattle when you play the drum, we're ready to put on the nameplate badge. In this situation, it's because it's a master signature series from Pearl, they usually put the nameplate badge on the reverse side of the drum from the air hole. So, laying the air hole against the table, we now know that the nameplate goes right on this side. So, because our wraps are thin enough to allow for any imperfections in the shell, what we've done is we've left the 3 holes that were used to mount the nameplate badge, we left those kind of rough so that they would actually poke up and we could see little dimples right there on the top of the finish. And using our hole punch, we find those little divots and pop it right through. So now we have pilot holes to go ahead and screw the nameplate badge back on. So placing the nameplate badge directly onto those 3 holes, using our trusty Phillips head screwdriver with a very small point, and their super minuscule little tiny screws, we can now go ahead and drive those right in. And there you have it. So now, nameplate badge is in place, strainers and lugs are all in place, and the air hole grommet. So now that is a finished drum, and ready to have its rims and heads put back on it. Isn't that gorgeous?